All right, so now we are going to cover how to do a timeline. And again, let me share my screen. And to start out with, we are going to be reminded that we get our timeline right here. And what you want to do is you want to click here and you want to download it. It's a big file, so it takes a moment to download. It is an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't think it works in, you can try it in Numbers or in some of the other programs you might have, but it's pretty much an Excel spreadsheet. So helpful to have Excel for this. So now I can show you what that documents look like because I've already downloaded it. And here we are. So this is our timeline and what it looks like for the data entry part. And you'll notice down here there's a couple of tabs. So here is a report if you wanted to show a simpler version of the timeline. Here are instructions, and it looks intense, but you know, when you can't figure something out, it very much helps. And here's a sample. So here's what a sample looks like, right? All filled in. So let's just do one. So obviously we're going to fill in our property. We're at 123 Main Street, right? And we've got an escrow agent is Shannon, and we've got the other agent is Andrea agent, and the buyer is Betty, and the seller is Sam, and our TMK number, and our escrow number, and our purchase contract reference date. And let's say this was Monday, which would have made it, I think that would have been like 8/9/2020. And then the acceptance date was 8/10/2020. And the closing date is 9/16/2020. And here's the MLS number. And what's the price? We said $575,000. And is there a lender involved? Who's the lender? And this, if you just widen this column just a little bit, should tell you what that number is, because number, when you see that in Excel, it simply means that the column is too narrow and it can't display the number. So this was updated, so it's giving us today, right? Which is cool, that it always updates the update date so that you can tell, is this my most recent version, right? Because you want to go in here and you want to make comments or notes and note your completion dates. In your file, what's required at the end of your transaction is that your timeline is filled in not only with the due dates, but with the actual completion dates, right? You can do this by hand, or you can come into the system and use the form. So to fill it out is pretty easy. You put your purchase contract in front of you. I recommend that if you have a counteroffer, you take the counteroffer items and you write them into your purchase contract so that your purchase contract has all the contractual elements of the contract in it. You can just make a note, highlight it in yellow, highlight or whatever, and say, changed per counteroffer, whatever you want to say. But that way, when you go to refer to your contract is complete, right? So you can now go in the order of, you just go page by page from page 1, page 2, and on page 2 is the first question, is there an initial earnest money deposit, and when is it due? Well, it's due 3 days after acceptance. And look what happens. We get a date, and we get a date in red. So now we can go to our legend and say, what does the date in red mean? That means it's due soon. Yes, that is true. Okay, good. An additional deposit is due how many days after J1? So this is due after an item, and J1 is the qualifier. So if I now fill this in, it's not going to give us the number here because I haven't filled in J1 yet, right? but this is due 2 days after, right? That's how we write our C2 section. We say our second earnest money deposit is due 2 days after completion of the J1 inspection period. So we're going to put 2 here, and yep, like I said, so I could scroll down to J1. Where's the J1? Here it is. Property inspection period ends, and we usually do that 14 days after acceptance, right? So there it is. And now I can scroll back up and look at that. Sure enough, if this ends on the 24th of August, my earnest money deposit is due on the 26th. Awesome. All right. Here is a reminder. This is a reminder to let the client know that the balance of the down payment is due. When would you like to do that? This is number of days prior to closing. I like to do this like 10 days prior to closing, right? Just give them a heads up. And now we get a pink kind of an orange thing. Due date falls on a weekend. That's fine. It's just a reminder. It doesn't matter. Next is E3 in the contract, right? I'm just going down the contract here. So E3 says PV system documents delivered to buyer. And we say there are none, so it's not applicable. So this is not applicable. Is there an inclusion list to be provided to the buyer? And we're going to say yes, because a few items are being included. It's due 7 days after acceptance, and the approval is due 5 days later, right? Because it says days from item E4A, and this was E4A. So this 5 days is dependent on this. Okay, next is closing date. Well, I've already got it at September 16th, so I'm going to put, what if I put 36 days? Is that the right date? No, it's 37 days. Okay, I have 37 days for my closing date extension. My contract says it would give us 10 days. And here's another reminder, and don't worry that the words come out over here. Preliminary title report due from escrow. So when would I like to follow up with escrow to make sure I got that? I'm going to make sure after 7 days. If I don't have a title report, I need to call them. And then preliminary title report review and approval is due 7 days after receipt, and seller to cure defects is 10 days after that. So you can see here how those work. And then we've got tenancy information to escrow. When is that due? That's usually in our contract set for 15 days. And then we've got the cash contingencies. Does H1 or H2 apply? In either case, how many days to provide proof of funds? So we're going to say in H1, we've got 3 days. And is it an issue? No, that's not an issue. That's item coming soon. No problem. This is an NA. H4A is the pre-qualification letter due from the buyer, and we should say, 4 days after acceptance. And again, that's happening soon, yes. And then the next one is a reminder, the appraisal. Has the appraisal been scheduled? So I want to make sure that the appraisal is scheduled within 14 days. If on on 14 days, I'm going to call and see that the lender has scheduled that appraisal, because conditional loan approval can't be done without it. So I might even go back and make this 10 days. I just recently had this be an issue in a transaction, and a lot of lenders don't realize that the appraisal is required as part of conditional loan approval. So you want to just follow up on that. Now, why is that? And that's because H4B hasn't been filled out, which I'm going to do next. Conditional loan approval, let's say, is due in, well, no, it's a shorter escrow than, let's say it's due in 25 days. And now we have another reminder, and it says buyer to select an insurance company. Well, the lender will take care of that, but I like to also ask, is there an insurance company you have in mind? So I might do that at 10 days. Same kind of question. It's particularly useful if you've got a cash buyer, because there is no one thinking about insurance. So it's a good reminder. And then satisfaction of lender's condition. When is final loan approval due? Prior to closing, and we're going to say 8 days prior to closing. So that's September 8th. And now we've got the seller's disclosure statement is due to the buyer 5 days from acceptance, and or make it 7. I believe the contract says 7. Our template, in other words, says 7. The seller's disclosure receipt is due from the buyer within 3 days. The seller's, let me move this up. The seller's disclosure is to be signed by the buyer. Now, approval, that's an odd word here. It really isn't approved, right? It's just acknowledged. But never mind, we use the word approved. And how many days later? And we give our buyer 7 days. And then we've already filled in the J1 inspection period, and J3, buyer to complete final walkthrough at 5 days prior to closing. And then final repairs and release of funds of repairs, how many days before closing? And we say 0. And then J8 and J9 is a reminder for the seller to schedule cleaning and removal of items. Well, I'm the buyer's agent, so I might just check with the listing agent and say, have you got a cleaner set up and whatever, or I might not. That's kind of up to, you know, depends on the agent. So you can decide whether to fill this in, but it would be, you know, like 10 days before, you want to make sure they've got a cleaner set up, right? And then to also order pet treatment, that's not applicable here, so we can do an NA. Removal of items to be completed 6 days prior to closing, right? Cleaning 6 days prior to closing. And release of funds for pet treatment is not applicable. And then here's another reminder for the listing agent to schedule the surveyor. The survey, you know, takes a little time, and you want to do that right up front. So within, I would say 7 days, I want to schedule the survey. And then the staking and survey is due, let's say 20 days after acceptance. And the termite inspector, in which case you want to do this at 3 days, right? Because if it's due that quickly, you need to get it done. The termite inspector selected, this is, I would also, the contract says we give people 7 days. A reminder, seller's agent to schedule the TIR, right? Again, I would do that in the first 3 days, just get it done. And the termite report delivered to the buyer is 14 days before closing. The tenting scheduled is not applicable. Tenting certification is not applicable. So let's move this up a little. And now we've got condo docs. Condo and subdivision documents delivered to buyers should be within 7 days from acceptance. And then 3 days later, a receipt from the buyer. And then the buyer has 10 days to review the documents. And are there any leasehold documents? This is not leasehold. And then are there any rental documents? And there are no rental documents here. And then the reminder to submit my green sheet 2 days after acceptance, and a reminder that to give notice to transfer utilities. And I might do that up to 10 days prior to closing, just because cable can take up to 10 days here. So you want to make sure about that, right? And then it's good to add NA even into these. All right, so now we filled everything in, and now what we want to do is now we want to sort it into chronological order. If you do not put this into chronological order, it really, what's the point, right? You've got a list of miscellaneous dates by in order of the paragraphs, but not in the dates. So we want to go by the due date. So we're going to go here, and we're going to go sort oldest to newest. I think that's right. And sure enough, here's the stuff that's due right away. And here's our entire timeline now in chronological order. So I can say here, I've done this, and I can go in here and put 8, 12, 20, right? And it shows it as completed. There we go, completed. And you can see from the legend right here, green means completed. So here are some things that are interesting. We have a couple of items that the seller's disclosure is due within 7 days from the seller, right? Well, what if the seller has done their seller's disclosure and we get it earlier? So let's say it arrives on the 13th. Now notice that this changes. The next items that pertain to the seller's disclosure changed as well, right here, right? It went from the 13th to the 16th, and it is now due right here on the 20th. So the system adjusts according to what your delivery date is, what your actual completion date is. And I should say that this is obviously an older version. In our new version, the due date remains the original due date, so that you can see that the due date was later and that you delivered earlier. So I apologize. I've been having trouble downloading because my internet is so slow. In any case, when you download your version, you'll see that it does that, and it's quite cool to be able to see, I did this early, I did this early, I did this early, okay? So the idea is for you to fill this in over time. If you're using a transaction coordinator, they will update these for you. My transaction coordinator sends me a new, revised, updated timeline once a week. And you should keep an updated timeline in your command file. Ask your transaction coordinator to do that, because your broker, when they want to answer a question you might have, really need to see your timeline. So this is a very cool document, and you can now go to the actual report and get it in this format so that it isn't quite so cumbersome, and you can just print it out just down to here, right? That's all you need. So if you like the simpler version, you can use the simpler version, or you can use this version. Cool. That's our timeline.